Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share the findings of our research project with you. The project was on a investigation of the significance of water and the permissibility of water reclamation among Muslims. In 2012, the residents of eThekwini municipality were informed that they would be receiving reclaimed water for their domestic use. The residents objected, and among them were a number of Muslims who said that the practice was not acceptable in Islam and they would not accept it. In contrast with their objection, the people of Beaufort West said that water reclamation did not object to water reclamation, and we know from many other countries, Muslim majority countries, where water reclamation is accepted and there is no religious objection. So the question of this project was to find out what was the nature of the objection, what was the meaning of that objection. But more broadly, we wanted to know what was the cultural significance of water and what did it mean when people objected to or accept water reclamation. What was the understanding of water? We thought that this was potentially a broader subject, a broader issue that one has to relate to in terms of water management. So this particular research project started with developing a number of reports on the cultural significance of water, on the broader significance of how water is thought of, how it is used in religious and cultural contexts. Secondly, we wanted to know what was the approach to water reclamation in Muslim majority countries, and more specifically wanted to know the understanding of the jurisprudence that had led to these divergent opinions. So we prepared a number of reports and we sent it to religious leaders, and we decided to focus specifically on religious leaders at first because they are the opinion makers in the society and they often determine the terms of the discourse, even though people might not all agree with them, but they certainly help us to understand the cultural significance of water at the first level. We then brought them together with their written and their oral comments, and our discussion then produced the final findings for this research report. At the outset, I must say that we found no real objection among Muslim majority countries to water reclamation practices, that a number of these countries, because they lie in countries and areas where there is very shortage of water, that increase of water, of population pressures, industrialization has led to an acceptance of water reclamation practices. There are debates on the use of reclaimed water for edible crops as such, but that is something shared with others as well. We only found one religious opinion in 1978 issued by Saudi Arabia that paved the way for water reclamation practices in other Gulf countries. So this particular opinion accepted water reclamation as such. But there was no noticeable impact of this religious opinion outside the Gulf, and outside the Gulf we didn't find any deliberation on religious issues. So from this perspective, it seemed that water reclamation practices should not necessarily be such a big problem as such. Nevertheless, we went ahead and we explored the broader significance, the broader understanding of water in Muslim context, in Muslim religious context. We looked at the religious literature, and it was very clear that water plays a very significant role as a source of life, as the essence of life. There is a very famous Quranic verse which says that all living things are created from water. Water plays a role in eschatological images, that pure water flows in the gardens of heaven, whereas hell or the torments of hell are characterized by the absence of water and by thirst. So there's an abundance of water imagery and water symbolism in religious literature. But water particularly also plays a role in purification, ideas of purification. Water is an ideal means of purification at the level of the physical, the moral and the spiritual as such. It is a physical purification that is debated extensively in the books of jurisprudence, and so we decided to look more specifically at this as such. Purification rituals, or at least the books of jurisprudence about how to live a life, how to live a moral life, begin with a topic of purity, and it is these first chapters that deal more specifically with water. So jurists have actually divided, spoken about the natural source of water, thought about pure water that flows, that doesn't necessarily have an unnatural color or unnatural taste or odor, that water is abundant in quantities as such. Even though there are impurities, there are abundant impurities as such. So the jurists identified natural sources of water. Then they identified the kinds of impurities that may impact on this water. Generally, they were a bit liberal, but they did emphasize that water can be made impure by the falling of objects in it. Generally, it is from humans to insects, to mice, to dogs, to cats. And they had elaborated in detail what makes water impure and not fit for use for ritual and for human consumption. But generally they argue that water which flows, which even though there are impurities, there has to be if there is a large enough quantity of water, and the impurities do not affect the condition of the water, then that water remains pure. They do not necessarily speak about reclaimed water as such. They never thought about water that can be reclaimed from its original state as such. But what they thought about the impurities and how that impacts on the water can be seen as a result, can be seen in our contemporary context as reclaimed water. Another thing that they emphasized a lot on was water, the scarcity of water, and the necessity to use it judiciously and almost even frugally. There is a very famous text which says that even if you are in front of a river, a flowing river, you should only use a little amount of water for purification practices. You should not necessarily abuse and use water excessively. So this frugal use of water is contrasted with this abundance of symbolism of the water as such. One must notice that this jurisprudence was not shaped in the context of industrialization, in the context of modern medical contaminants as such. So there is no explicit definition and discussion of water reclamation. But the majority of the scholars and the jurists that we spoke to agree that the modern form of water reclamation can actually be compared with the traditional understanding of water which does not have too many impurities as such. We did receive one opinion that objected, that said that water cannot be purified at all. But on close inspection we found that it did not necessarily make a material impact on how this particular person would view water that has been reclaimed, as long as it is flowing or it doesn't have unnatural qualities as such. The person who sent us his opinion clearly was thinking of water as a pure substance, not necessarily made of molecules, but a pure substance that lost its original nature and which could not be regained anymore. And I think this particular objection as such was significant, was something that to be noted, even though it was a minority position. But as I said, that it did not materially impact on how water should be treated coming out from a reclaimed water plant as such. In the larger group, for example, the overwhelming majority of our research partners agree that water can be reclaimed, that water can be used after reclamation practices. They did raise concern about the excessive leakage in the system. They felt that this was a violation of an Islamic principle of water excess, of not conserving the supply of water. They did ask that the Water Research Commission should run campaigns about the measures that have been taken to purify water, particularly against modern chemical and medical contaminants, and that's something that they raised specifically concern about. But on their side, they also supported the general water management practices that are undertaken within South Africa. They committed themselves to support these campaigns wherever they can. And then more specifically, they also suggested that mosques should begin to think about recycling water. And one of the mosques was identified as as an experimental site, which could be promoted elsewhere as well. So in conclusion, that water plays a very significant role in Islamic jurisprudence, but also in the broader religious literature. The source of life is water. The water is it plays a very important role in the cosmological understanding of Islam. But water more specifically plays a role in jurisprudence, and there the water develops treatment, or at least receives extensive treatment about purity and impurities that we found did not directly disagree with the kind of water management or water reclamation practices that are carried out in contemporary societies. This particular project is should be part of a broader project on thinking about the significance of water, the cultural significance of water. I think it would be very important to understand cultural significance in terms of water management, so that unnecessary impediments cannot come in the way of water management. But we also find evidence that by looking at the cultural significance of water, that water management could actually be enhanced with the support of a cultural view or a symbolical view of water as such. We hope that the small project would be the basis for more broader research on the cultural worlds of water in South Africa and beyond.